In this video, we're going to look at comments that Professor Jane Hutton made when she joined me recently to discuss both her involvement in the Lucy Letby case and the parliamentary speech of Sir David Davis and response from Mark Roberts, who's the Chief Constable of the Cheshire Constabulary. This is particularly relevant because Professor Hutton had been asked by Cheshire Police to conduct a statistical study in relation to the Lucy Letby investigation, which was then mysteriously cancelled by the Crown Prosecution Service. When Professor Hutton joined me, she discussed everything that had occurred with Cheshire Police and the befuddling circumstances that surrounded this incident.
So firstly, I want to ask you about the specific points related to yourself. Could I ask you to just go through the story of what happened with Cheshire Police again, please?
Yes. As was said, I was actually approached on the 22nd of March 2018. So I know from Sir David's speech that that was 10 months after Cheshire Police had been advised to contact a statistician. And they wanted me to look at a spike in babies collapsing and dying. I was rather concerned that they said they'd already collected substantial material and that they were focusing on assessing the chances of sheer coincidence, which is not the right approach to looking at a cluster of events. And that's been well established for 40 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, had the initial discussion, signed confidentiality agreements, myself and my colleague, Dr. Linda Nichols. We were allowed to look at a briefing document, but not keep a copy of it. And the main points which Cheshire Constabulary wanted to liaise with the Crown Prosecution Service on were the chances of high mortality just being a coincidence, perhaps with a comparison of other hospitals, and then whether one particular member of staff being on duty could just be down to coincidence, or what would the chances be, 1 in a million, etc., exclamation mark. And then I expect the CPS will have their own ideas on what statistics would be useful. Well, of course, that proved to be true. The CPS did have very definite ideas on what would be useful. So, that is an absolutely textbook case, and I've previously mentioned a textbook case from 1993 to 95, where there were 5 unusual events and the whole issue was tied up within less than 2 years. We're now well over 10 years since concerns were first raised. So on 4th of April, I confirmed that if you do the basic analysis, there was definitely an increase in the crude number of deaths and that it should be investigated. There's no doubt you wanted to know why was there an increase. But at that point, I asked for permission to contact a pediatrician who worked with the National Register for Information on the Safety of Mothers and Babies, as well as another pediatrician with whom I'd published work on deaths and violent deaths in babies and children. I asked quite a few questions about what was happening. And in particular, I said, you've talked about acute life-threatening events. How are these defined? How are the cases identified? That's absolutely critical. Before you collect any data, you need to know what you're looking for. We're all human. We all have biases.
Yeah.
And we need to put in place checks and balances against those biases. The forensic regulator's guidance makes that absolutely clear. So I confirmed what data would be needed, sketched out the kind of data that would be needed. And on the 18th of April, 2018, I requested the data to be as blind as possible. I met the Cheshire Police in person in Liverpool on the 14th of May, 2018. I gave them notes. I was told about the RCPH report, the Child Health College report, but if I'd had been actually given a copy, I would have had additional information, and that would have meant I could insist on a proper evaluation in line with what Public Health England, or whatever its name was at the time, requires. Again, those procedures have been established for decades. So we got a signed consultancy agreement finally on the 31st of July 2018. In other words, Letby had been arrested for the first time, despite the fact that there was no valid evidence on which to arrest her. 13th of August 2018, I gave some more advice. 18th of August, I was told that more babies had come into the inquiry, which was rather worrying because I still had no definitions. 18th of August, sorry, and then I suggested times for a call and waited for a call on the 11th of September. Nothing happened. 18th of October 2018, I was informed that there was a meeting with the CPS planned for early November, and the police hoped to find out how many deaths or collapses might be initially included in the prosecution. And the arrest had been in relation to 14 infants, but first, further cases. Now, again, I knew that no correct information had been collected yet, and yet they were discussing these cases. Another long silence, 17th of January 2019. I got an update saying there was a CPS meeting in early February. We haven't discussed the idea of statistical evidence with them at this case. You might remember that the prosecution from the very start made it clear this was a statistical case, talking about significant rise and what's the chance of that. It may be that the barrister assigned, who is ultimately responsible for prosecuting the case in court, has his own view on the usefulness of statistical analysis in this case. We won't know this for some time yet, as regular meetings with the Queen's Counsel barrister wouldn't start until well past charge. I find it incredible that the CPS and the police are so happy to run a prosecution on statistical grounds, very clearly on grounds of pattern evidence on coincidence, and yet have no idea whether they're going to use statistics until well past the charge. It's clear that the warnings from the House of Commons in 2005 about the failure of lawyers and judges to prevent the miscarriage of justice in the Angela Canning's case and Sally Clark cases was just ignored, both by the CPS and by Nicholas Johnson, I think it is, now King's Counsel. So then we wait again, 20th of May 2019. I get told the Cheshire Police hadn't yet sought CPS thoughts on statistical evidence. He claimed the amount of charges, that's the word he used, would have a large bearing on statistics. That makes no sense to me, as the number of charges should only become evident after you've followed the correct procedures for collecting and analysing data. You're saying we're going to make the charges, in effect, and then we will collect the evidence. So then we have another long wait, 4th of December 2019. I get told Cheshire Police are waiting some results for a few further medical experts before asking CPS advice. November 2020, I was approached by a lot of people, including Peter Green, who was the president of the RSS, Royal Statistical Society, who highlighted the errors in the statistics used by Professor Sir Roy Meadows in the Sally Clark case. And there were a lot of other people who were very concerned about this. I spoke to my police contact, and he expressed concern that if a report was written about this, it would be linked to me and affect my status as an expert witness. In other words, as far as I was concerned, and as far as Cheshire Police were concerned, I remained an expert witness whom they had engaged. April 2021, I was informed the trial was set for January 22. We still had not been asked for any work. June 2021, I was informed that the trial was now set for July 2022. Cheshire Police had discussed with the prosecution the benefits of statistics again as an evidential tool to present to a jury. And he then got in touch with me on the 12th of July to arrange a meeting with himself and the analyst. And then on the 15th of July, this meeting was cancelled on the instructions of the CPS, who had been informed of the consideration of the validity of the statistical evidence again in this case. And the response was, the prosecutor does not agree with our line of inquiry and has instructed us not to pursue this avenue any further at present. Sir David Davies' speech makes it very clear that that was both against the Code of Prosecutors and against Criminal Investigations and Procedures Act 1996. But it's also the UK Parliament had stated the warning about human cost and damage to public confidence in the criminal justice system caused by the miscarriages of justice associated with flawed expert evidence. And ironically, once again, we're talking about a retired paediatrician weighing in and saying that no other experts are needed. No, there's no statistics in the case. The forensic science regulator's guidance seems to be completely ignored by the police, the CPS, and the barristers. And despite this, they just decided they would ignore it. So I find it very worrying that despite very well-known miscarriages of justice because of failures of medical experts to understand statistics, they went ahead regardless, particularly given the amount of money that has been spent both on the prosecution and on the Thirlwell inquiry, the amount of damage done to the parents of the children, as well as Lucy Letby and her family. As I say, if the correct approaches had been implemented by the hospital, which they could probably have started doing in 2016, you might have had a complete resolution to this by 2018.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to reiterate as a follow-up question, finally, I mean, you were fully expecting to be involved, weren't you? This wasn't, some sort of casual approach. You thoroughly expected to work on this, didn't you?
Yes, I was thoroughly expecting. I mean, in fact, in the documents disclosed, the list of documents not disclosed, the summary of it said that there was a contract with me. It was rather misleadingly expressed. It didn't say contract with a statistician in order to do this. And I think it's the CPS had signed it off as unlikely to be helpful for the defense, which frankly is, I don't know that it's expression, I think it's best described as an expression of the most arrogant ignorance possible. But then I've come across a lot of lawyers
just called it rubbish,
who decide that they can define what statistics is for their own convenience, and that statisticians should not be allowed to comment.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've already given us multiple reasons why the claim that I'm going to discuss in a second is preposterous. But what did you think when Mark Roberts said in this letter, Cheshire Police, I'm paraphrasing slightly, Cheshire Police never had any intention of commissioning a statistical report or any statistical work?
I think that what I would say is that Mark Roberts, as Chief Constable, has let his profession down very badly. It's sad. I don't know whether he was misled or whether he simply didn't bother to look at the documents. You can see that even in 2020, 2021, when we're coming up to a trial, when I would otherwise have authored the report with the Royal Statistical Society, I was being asked not to because I was considered a retained expert witness. So I either, or perhaps he has some curious definition of what retaining an expert witness means. That means if you're constantly being given information and told that your information might be required, you're not being retained. And if you're told that you're not allowed to say anything because there's a non-disclosure agreement, you're not being retained. I can't understand. It's absolutely, it's routine as an expert witness that at some point you get a formal sign-off, either when a case is settled or when a judgment has been given, and that's the marker for you to confidentially destroy information that you hold. I have never had a dismissal from the Cheshire Constabulary.
So there were clear indications there from Professor Hutton regarding what should occur in a police investigation of this nature, and clearly that never happened. There are many more comments from Professor Hutton in my forthcoming book, Reasonable Doubt, examining the case of Lucy Letby, which will be released on the 9th of July on hardback, paperback, ebook and audiobook. Thank you for watching.